Welcome to the Garden Podcast, a source where young adults and the next generation can engage in the conversations they want most to have. Every other week, we'll be talking together about an array of subjects that are designed to help us root ourselves in God's Word while we lean into important conversations, helping us right where we're at so we can flourish wherever we're planted.
My name is Chris Tafoya. I am our Young Adults Director here at the Bridge Church in Middle Tennessee, and I get the great opportunity and the honor of getting to lead the garden. It's our young adult gathering. Right now we gather twice a month, and this previous week that we gathered, and we had a special guest come through, and he's with me now. I'll introduce him here in just a moment, and man, he's already meant so much to my life and to the life of the Bridge Church, and we're so glad that he's with us. And he got a chance to start off this series that we're doing on mental health. And so, as the last few months have been just kind of dreaming and planning, what to do when it comes to a podcast, we felt like this was the best opportunity to go right into it, to kind of go right in the deep end and, unpack some things around mental health. And so we have a special guest, none other than the man himself.
Okay, all right.
Ian Simkins here on the podcast. What's up, man?
Oh, man. Dude, thank you for having me. And great job with that intro, by the way.
Hey.
That was killer.
Hey, man.
Well done.
I do what I can.
You're doing it well.
No, but seriously, we're glad you're here.
Thanks, man.
Man, give us, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from?
Yeah,
let's have it.
I'm still kind of the new guy on the team. My wife
true.
and I just moved down here from Chicago last year, March of 2021.
Yeah.
And it's been a wild ride. She's from Chicago. I'm born and raised from Detroit. Moved out to Chicago for my undergrad work and just never left. That's where I met my wife at a church I was pastoring, which is that's a weird way to meet the woman you're going to marry. That's a story for another time. But yeah, I'd been there since 2003, and it's a whole other journey. But like God made it explicitly clear, this was the next leg for us. So me and we got two little boys, yeah. Owen and Redmond, 4 and 3. Yeah. And then a third on the way coming this summer. So
congrats.
Man, awesome, thank you, man. We're thrilled. We're loving it.
That's incredible. So what's it like moving to the South? So this is your first time technically living in the South, right?
Yep.
I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, and so I've only been in the South for about 2.5, 3 years.
Okay.
And I know when I first moved, man, this is a different world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different country almost.
Yep.
How's it been for you?
It's been a trip, man. Like that, there were things that people preempted before we moved down to kind of give me my bearings a little bit. Some of the things you just can't prepare for, but like some of the stuff that stands out to me, like I'm not used to walking in the street saying hi to someone and someone actually saying hi back.
Absolutely.
I actually love that. I've been that guy for better or for worse most of my life. So to come to a place like this where like, oh my gosh, people seem to actually want to have even just I don't know, something in that is just beautiful. I love that so much. I learned the hard way that bless your heart isn't necessarily a blessing. Same. Stuff like that. To move down in the time of COVID, Illinois and Tennessee were completely different planets in that regard. So that felt like a lot of recalibrating from what we had been used to where we were at. But it's been a blast. I think the community at the Bridge in particular has been, I think, the greatest source of just like community and anchoring for us amidst all the other craziness of uprooting your family. Like the family here has just been paramount. It's been awesome.
That's great. I love that you mentioned bless your heart. My first week here, I think I was at like either a gas station or like a local like Walgreens or something. And I asked the lady that was working there, I said, hey, what is Bojangles? Never heard of it in my life.
Right.
I kind of thought it was a Spanish thing, like Bojangles. I thought it was a Mexican restaurant. And so
it's not, is what you're saying?
No, it's a chicken place.
Okay, I appreciate that.
So I didn't know what it was, and I asked her that, and she literally looked at me and she said, "Oh, bless your heart, honey."
Your first week?
Yeah, and she walked away. She said, "Bless your heart, honey," and walked away.
Didn't answer your question.
Yeah, didn't answer the question.
Amazing.
So I think she knew I wasn't from these parts, and so, but nonetheless, it's been great.
You have some Southern sentimentality to you, though, don't you? No,
I do. I don't know why. Couldn't tell you why.
In you.
Somebody at the garden a few weeks ago said they thought I was from Alabama. They said I have a slight accent.
No kidding.
Which I blame the one and only Chris Dolberry for that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I've got a chance to hang out with him quite a bit, and so I've probably picked up on some phrases and some things.
Sure.
Hey, it is what it is.
I've been hearing that since I was probably 17 or 18, though. I worked at a coffee shop outside Detroit, and once a week someone would ask me where in the South I was from. And I was like, I live 3 blocks that way. Like, I'm
South
from,
of here.
there's something in now there is a Detroit y'all. I will say that.
Okay.
So, like, y'all was already kind of in my vernacular, so maybe that's what people were interpreting.
Could be.
Who knows?
I mean, who knows what it is? But seriously, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks for doing this. Man, you got a chance to preach at the Garden for the first time.
Yeah, man. Thank you for inviting me, by the way. I love what you guys are doing with the Garden, and sincerely, I was honored to be asked. I feel like with every passing year, I feel more and more irrelevant, and I feel like what the Garden is doing in the area of young adults is like so special. So to be invited into it felt like a privilege.
Yeah. Well, everybody loved having you there.
Yeah, thanks,
and hearing from you. Even those that don't call the Bridge Church their home.
Yeah.
Loved hearing from you.
That's great.
And so it was a great night. And man, you got to unpack a little bit around mental health. I know that's like it's not a familiar topic, I would say, or a common topic in the church world. As far as, I guess, historically, I mean, people haven't really talked about it that much.
Yeah.
I know growing up myself, I didn't hear much about it.
Right, same.
But again, I loved your message. I love what you brought. There's 2 quotes that I wrote down that I want to share that I love so much. You were talking around the idea of you kept saying you're not alone.
Yeah.
When it comes to having mental health issues or whatever that looks like, you're not alone. There are people around you that can help you, support you. You should never feel like you're alone. And you said this quote, everything weighs less when we carry it together.
Yeah.
Unpack that. Where'd you hear that? I think it's so good.
Yeah, my buddy Garrett, actually, I reached out to a couple people in preparation for this who I think have just been prolific, particularly around conversations of mental health and wellness. And that was one of his quotes. And for me, I think one of the most destructive lies is that you're alone. You're the only one who's ever felt this way. I think that's what keeps us in the shadows, keeps us in isolation. I think the enemy knows that, right? So that's probably a big reason why I said it a dozen times on Tuesday. And I think there's a reason. I think I mentioned this on Tuesday. In the New Testament, there's something like 59 one another's.
Oh, yep.
Forgiving one another, bearing one another's burdens, showing partiality and love to one another. Like there's no way to accomplish 59 one another's in isolation. Like the vast majority of the time that the word you shows up in the New Testament, it's plural. He's talking to a community, not just an individual person. And I feel like in the modern West in particular, we so hyper glorify individualized success and individualized pain and struggle. And I think, at least in my life, and this is more conjecture than doctrine, any real season of like deep and profound growth or healing happened in the context of community, of like raising a hand and admitting, I have failed miserably, or I've fallen apart here, or I can't figure this out. And I remember very intensely those seasons of feeling completely alone, and remembering how difficult it was to raise a hand, and then realizing the more and more that I did, other voices saying, man, I felt that way too. That just like felt like so life-giving just to hear from someone else. Like, oh yeah, man, it wasn't recent, but I've also been there. Yeah. I've also been on that boat. I've been on that journey. And I think I just read this quote from Henry Now, and he said something like, the great myth of leadership is the thought that people can be led out of the desert by someone who's never been there. Oof. And I think back to the people that have like been most formative for me in my life. They had a desert season too. They had a dark night of the soul, and I think it's when we can actually bear those burdens together. Yeah. It feels like Jesus, the New Testament writers, actually understood that and included that for a reason, because we just weren't intended to carry those things alone. No,
that's so good. And like I said, I never heard it put that way, but I absolutely love that. There's another quote that you said. I think it was towards the end of your message. You were talking really around the idea of so often we can just be in our heads a lot. And there's a lot of voices, whether it's rooted in insecurities, it's doubt, all these kind of different voices that we hear. And it's so common. You come across somebody and, they may say to you like, oh, I don't think I'm good enough to do that. And it's like, hey, where did you hear that from? And it's just that voice, in our heads that, can so often lie to us. Yep. And you said this quote, if the voice in your head is not whispering love, grace, and forgiveness, it's not Jesus. Yeah, right. So good. Where did that come from?
I think a lot of modern psychology uses the word like rumination. I think a lot of our mental health and specifically around anxiety and depression comes from like a cow chewing cud is like the analogy I've heard, where it's just like a an obsessive ruminating on like a single, typically negative idea or principle. And I think what has been pretty mind blowing to me is how easy it is for us to believe lies and to give real estate to scripts and narratives that aren't actually from Jesus. Yeah. And I think what probably is worth clarifying, like when I talk about the voice of Jesus being the one of like love, grace, mercy, and forgiveness, it doesn't mean that it doesn't also include at times like correction, like discipline. In the same way that my like earthly father that I know loves me, in love, he's had to say like, hey, that needs to stop like yesterday. Wow. Or here's a hard truth about yourself that you maybe don't want to know, but because I love you, I need you to know this and understand this and live into this, you know? So it's not just about this like buddy Jesus who's just always like, you know, ready to embrace you with a hug. Although
that'd be nice.
I think that's probably still true. But yeah, the picture of love and grace and forgiveness we get from Jesus includes sanctification, formation, the difficult like chiseling away of that which is toxic to us and to others. I just realized though, for how many people in my pastoral experience have not only like heard a script, but they've like latched onto it, and that is the dominant voice in their head. And I think, man, if we don't address that, then no amount of sermonizing or Instagram quotes are really going to change that. So you got to kind of go after it in a lot of ways. I think the narrative predominant voice that people have playing in their heads.
Playing in their heads, yeah. No, that's so good. What and there's kind of like a common, I guess you'd say, question that came from the night, and it's honestly not even from the night. It's something that I've heard so often, and it's this: it's why has the church historically been so silent on mental health? You know, why has it been so silent? And I don't know in full like your upbringing or the church you grew up in, but for me, I grew up in I guess more of a charismatic church.
Sure.
And growing up, I felt like it was always kind of two schools of thoughts. When it comes to mental health, I feel like churches or pastors, whatever you want to say, was either really quiet on it, or for my upbringing in church, it was very much over spiritualized, if that's the correct word.
Right.
And it was like, hey, something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
That's a sin. That's almost demonic. Is kind of the language and stuff that I heard growing up. And so what that did is it really, like you talked about a second ago, kind of pushed people into the dark and into isolation of like, okay, I think something is really wrong with me that I don't know what to do about. Like, I've prayed about it. I've talked to God about it. And then there's a lot of churches that I feel like have not said anything about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's, whatever, just kind of work through it. You'll figure it out.
Yep.
And so why do you think, I mean, the church has kind of been like that historically, silent, if you would?
Sure. Yeah, I'll say two things as a caveat. One, I'm not a clinician, and I'm a big believer in like pastors understanding their pay grade. I think a lot of pastors, many with good intent, have tried to make clinical diagnoses without clinical training.
So
I think that's legitimately, not only is it damaging, it's arguably spiritual malpractice to try to counsel someone in a situation that you've not been trained for. Secondly, I always want to be careful to never speak for all churches, right? Like I read something, I have no idea if this is accurate, but I read somewhere recently that there's something like 30,000 Christian denominations worldwide, like identified as Christian. So there's a million, endless list of different reasons why churches may or may not be silent on the issue. But I have some thoughts as to, at least in my own experience. Yeah. I think when I think about the West in particular, that's my context, that's my experience. Think of, guys like Plato and Descartes who have had a lot of influence on the Western Church, post-Enlightenment in particular. I think that there has been a real denigration of the physical body, and in some ways almost a hyper-elevation of spirit and soul language. Now, I think they both deserve to be elevated, but like try and do a quick Google search on a theology of the body. Protestant evangelicals have not done a great job of even articulating one, let alone helping people understand what do I do when something doesn't seem to be functioning the way it's supposed to. So if you have a predominant school of thought that in some ways is more Gnostic than Christian, then anything that has to do with like our physicality is ignored, denigrated, or worse in some circles, which actually kind of accounts for both. It accounts for both the silence side and the over spiritualized side. The silence side is like the body Doesn't really matter. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
You need to pray harder. You need to believe harder. Or any issue you're facing must be demonic. I absolutely believe, by the way, in spiritual warfare. I believe that that's an absolutely, I think Scripture is clear that that is a part of our reality here on planet Earth. But to categorize all battles, all struggles, and simply say it's some kind of demonic force, to me, again, I think is part of why so many people have remained silent. And it's not even just that their pastors or the pulpit has been quiet on it. Sometimes it's been outright dismissive of it. Yeah. I think anyone who's sitting in the chairs of an auditorium hearing someone with a microphone say, well, you're just possessed, or it doesn't matter. I'm not raising a hand in that environment to say, I'm kind of coming unraveled right now. And I think that's kept a lot of people in silence and probably worse, probably postures of shame, which is why it's a topic that I think I said this on Tuesday. I think the church should be the safest place on planet Earth to talk about our real struggles. And unfortunately for a lot of people, it's been the opposite.
Yeah, well, I think you said something that I'd never really thought about until this moment. This idea of, hey, like when it comes to preaching and pastors and leading, like they're not necessarily experts on it.
Totally.
But I think that's kind of a good thing in some ways, because it gives room for a ton of grace.
Yeah. Right.
Like, hey, like this is not the person. That's not their expertise. That's not their field, if you'd put it. And so there's a lot of grace that's given there. We're like, okay, this guy, he probably doesn't have all the answers when it comes to mental health stuff.
Right.
And so it's okay to seek that and look for that.
100%.
Look into it. And, you don't need to Google WebMD. And you know what happens when you do that.
Yeah, we all do. We've all done it. We're all guilty of it.
You find the worst. The other night when you were preaching, you really talked about how having anxiety and suicidal thoughts, it's not a sin.
Yeah.
Can you just unpack that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that is another narrative that I've heard asserted throughout at least my adult life, and I think there's a number of people that I mentioned too from Scripture, from David to Jeremiah to Solomon, who, when you not only read the text but understand like the original language behind this text, in many ways what they're talking about is more than just like being bummed out. Like one of the passages that I read was from Paul's letter to the church in Corinth about talking about like despairing even unto death. We talk about Jesus himself experiencing a level of stress that resulted in like sweating drops of blood. Mm-hmm. And we, again, tend to sometimes over-spiritualize these things. And I think because we read them, at least I do this, sometimes we read biblical text through a certain like biblical voice. Like it's sort of it's sort of a flannel graph VBS kind of a voice. And I think that's often what keeps us disconnected from the real humanity of what's being articulated about their struggle. That's like good. Job's a classic example. I mentioned at the garden too, a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. They're not Psalms of happy, clappy, everything is great. It's like, it's sorrow, it's despair. We have a whole book called Lamentations, which seems to imply then, if the Bible doesn't hide these stories of grief and sorrow and pain, maybe we don't either. And I don't know where along the lines we got comfortable reading about ancient stories of anxiety and depression and then translated that as modern guilt for experiencing the same things. Yep. And I don't quite know where that happened, but I know that happens a lot. And I know that people, whether it's something they believed intrinsically or something that was handed to them.
Do you feel like you say you don't know when or where that happened. Do you feel like it's just been amplified in today's culture because of the idea of
that's interesting, looking
good, successful, you got to achieve, in any form of just kind of negative thought or feeling or anything that makes you look or seem less than is not a good thing in society's standards?
That's interesting. I was just reading an article how, historically a lot of like Eastern cultures would be what we would call like honor shame cultures. And in the United States in particular, we've been a guilt innocence culture. And this particular article was asserting that we're actually steering more and more towards an honor shame culture. And they would give, kind of modern examples. And we see some of this in quote unquote cancel culture, depending on maybe that's a different podcast. I do think shame is a main vehicle by which a lot of us interpret our own struggles. And if the systems around us, whether they've been built or we've entered into, perpetuate or even imply certain guilt or shame around a particular feeling or struggle. Yeah. Like it makes sense then that we would take that on ourselves. And I think that's part of what keeps people not only silent, but worse. Like I think we're seeing people truly despairing, not knowing where they can turn. And again, I think well-meaning pastors without proper training have oftentimes steered people in very dangerous directions, trying to do the best they can rather than simply saying, you know what, I think this is actually more complex than I personally had the training for.
Yep.
Like if you're a pastor listening, I cannot encourage you enough to do the hard work of vetting mental health professionals in your community that you can in good conscience refer people to, because people are going to come and ask questions. One, have the humility to say, I actually don't have good answers for this. Two, I've vetted 4 or 5 local counselors that I think they got their head on straight. I can vouch for them. Dare I say, set aside some budget money and say, hey, we're going to help you kind of begin in this journey. Yes. I think that is a really practical way that churches can begin to love their neighbors in a way that is it's clearly like a real need.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I feel like the times where we do open up about this, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed. I guess for me growing up, or what I would hear so commonly is, oh, well, you haven't prayed hard enough.
Right.
You don't trust God right now. Why? I felt you kind of spoke a little into it, the humility of it, where pastors and leaders need to be okay with saying, hey, I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
Like, why is that? Are we leaning that direction now, where we're starting to say, like, hey, I don't know the answer to that, but like, I'll walk with you. We'll go figure this out together. Like, do you feel like we're leaning more that way rather than, no, this is the answer, I have it all figured out, like it's a pride thing? Like, do you feel like that's starting to shift in society or in leadership?
I hope it is. Cornel West once said, I'm not hopeful, but I'm optimistic. Yeah. And I feel like I really resonate with that a lot. I do feel like, you only have to spend 2 minutes on Twitter to realize just because you're an expert in one thing doesn't mean you're an expert in everything.
Yep.
We're seeing a lot of that hot take, dunk on everyone else. Everyone's an expert on everything. Whatever the issue du jour is, everyone seems to have an advanced degree in it, which is not always great. I do think, to give a nod to your generation, I think the tide is turning. I think there's going to become an increasing dissatisfaction with veneer, with false knowledge. I got an email a couple weeks ago from some ministry company that the subject heading was pastors warning Gen Z or fact checking. And I was like, why should that be a warning? Like, that shouldn't be.
That's a good thing.
Because the subtext is like, hey, you can't BS in the pulpit anymore because they know how to find the correct information. It bummed me out that was a warning, but it also gave me hope. Like, I think the younger generation is becoming increasingly dissatisfied with, like, hey, we don't actually need you to be the Bible answer man for every question. In fact, the leaders that I most resonate with are the ones who had told me, I don't know.
Yes.
I'm gonna find the answer. I'm gonna journey with you in this. You want to get coffee again in a month? But the guy, I don't know. I've always had a little bit of a analogy to I have an answer for everything and a quick response, and it's usually very simplistic answers to very complex problems.
Yes.
And again, I get the temptation to go that route because more often than not, pastors are driven by some kind of wound.
Yep. I
think they often have insecurity they haven't dealt with. There's issues of ego. I mean, you're putting someone up on a platform with lights and a microphone. That's always that's big or small church, doesn't matter. That's a battle everyone's facing, particularly if you put someone in a position like that regularly. And I think now the way that we know how dopamine in the brain works, right? Every wave of dopamine opens up more receptors, and so you need a bigger wave to achieve the same level of high. And so I think pastors' desires, they're needing to be needed, often leads them to want to be able to give answers to every question they ever get. Yeah. And I think to have humility to say,
don't know,
I don't have a good response to that is very counterintuitive to the ego. But it's really, really necessary. And I do think the younger generation is going to start demanding it more and more, as well they should.
Yeah, they're drawn to it. I definitely noticed that that kind of wave starting to shift for sure. Now, what would you say to that young adult, that person that's maybe listening, that's like, hey, Pastor Ian, I'm anxious. There's times where I feel depressed. I worry a lot, but I believe in God.
Yeah,
I trust God. Like, I even pray, but I still feel anxious.
Yeah.
What do I do?
I mean, I would say a couple of things. First, to reiterate, one, it's normal that you feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the world's nuts. The world's crazy. Like, that's one of the most helpful things that my therapist has even said to me. Like, yeah, it makes sense that you'd be stressed about this, that you'd be overwhelmed. Like, just hearing that from another human can be so life-giving. Like, okay, you're not, it's why I said you're not alone so many times, probably. Yeah. And there are some, like, answers that maybe you would expect from me, like being in the Word, meditating, chewing, maybe even trying something like a Lectio Divina, like, sitting with the Word rather than just consuming it. For me, like, there's a lot of other things that I think Sabbath and rest are connected to. Yeah. And Sabbath and rest are not just days off. They're actually days on. It's not just about resting. It's about what stirs my affections for Christ. A lot of us don't take time to even answer that question. And there are other things that may seem obvious that are easy to miss, to do it in community, like voice it to another human.
Yep.
We now know, like, physiologically, there's a strong correlation to physical activity in our mental health.
Absolutely.
You don't have to go climb a mountain. Just, like, go breathe real air. Like, it's amazing how often we go from our air-conditioned house to our air-conditioned car to our air-conditioned office and then back again.
Yep.
And then after 6 years of that, we're like, I feel kind of disconnected from life and creation and God.
Wonder
like,
why.
Yeah, you are. You are disconnected. I'm not saying going for a walk is like some magic pill, but I think these are like steps, things we can start to do, and to recognize that, like, God is as present in your pain as he is in your joy. Like, it's not just hey, you better deal with this worry. Scripture says don't worry. And until you're not worrying, God's around the corner with his arms crossed. Like, this is why Psalms of Lament are so beautiful, because it shows God's divine presence in our pain and in the times we can't hear his voice. John of the Cross writes about the dark night of the soul. Mother Teresa, they found her journals a couple years after she passed. There was these hidden journals that no one knew about, and in them, it's really, like, beautiful but heart-wrenching, where she kind of articulates years of feeling like God is absent.
Wow.
I mean, Mother Teresa was like a punchline of holiness. Yeah. Like, even atheists were like, yeah, she's doing good work in the world, And even she, in her, like, most intimate moments, were like, I don't know if the Lord hears me, if I'm doing this right. Like, real anxiety, depression, sorrow. I'm like, okay, if Mother Teresa felt this at times, then maybe it's actually okay that I'm going through this too,
Yeah, which, that's so good. You kind of leaned into my next question too, like, what are some ways we can prioritize our mental health? And I know you answered a bunch of those in a lot of different ways. I got the chance actually recently to do some work with the NFL Hall of Fame and the health side of it. And what we basically really got to do is go talk to these former NFL athletes who, were at the best in what they do, the best in their field. And we got to talk to them about health, but specifically behavioral health and mental health. And it was so fascinating. We had all these mental health experts walk in the room and sit down across from these insane just athletes and begin to ask them these questions. And they talked about just the rate of depression and all these different things the minute they retired. Yeah. Because while they were playing, they had this schedule, they were working out, they were eating, they were on a specific diet, they were doing all these things that their physical health, it directly affected their mental health. And so the minute they retired, they stopped doing those physical things, and it's just like their mental health began to deteriorate the minute they did that. And so I love that you mentioned that, because that's something that I speak about a lot, and my wife speaks into a lot, of just like, hey, go take a walk. Like, get outside. I mean, we are now more than ever, we're constantly sitting down, we're on our phones, we're the screen time. And I know you love to lean into and talk about rest a lot, and I love that so much about you. But I want to hit on that a little bit more, because I feel like there's so many people that believe rest looks like, I'm going to sit down and watch Netflix for 6 hours.
Right.
And there's a difference between that rest and the rest you're talking about. Right. Can you explain?
Man, I would love to. I mean, first let me say, I think I talk about it so much because I'm terrible at it. Like,
I'm with you.
It's a very real struggle. Like, I think people assume, oh, this must be the thing that you've really nailed. Like, nothing could be further from the truth. I have innate workaholism, like, in my bones. I find meaning and identity in my accomplishments.
Enneagram
all
3,
the time. All that stuff. Yeah. A couple of things. One, we see modeled in the person of Jesus. He's regularly retreating. I mean, there's literally texts that say there were still sick people in the village, like begging him to stay longer, like good work to be done. And he said, I need to be about my Father's work. He's taking naps in boats. He's like eating meals with those people. Yeah. He's like retreating to like mountainsides. Like, I think a lot of church, if Jesus were to apply for a job today at a modern church, a lot of us would have a hard time with his work ethic. They legitimately would. And I think I think it's hard. Even the fact that we talk a lot about work ethic, but never about rest ethic. I've never heard an organization talk about, here's our rest ethic as an organization. That shows what we value. I'm not saying work ethic is bad. You need to have good work ethic too. The other thing I would say about rest and Sabbath, Abraham Heschel once said that those who work with their minds, Sabbath with their hands, and those who work with their hands, Sabbath with their minds. So like for me, I'm on a computer a lot. Mm-hmm. So when I rest, sometimes, like before I was married, I would just go on a bike ride all day long. I'd go on a 15-hour bike ride, and that was so restorative for me. But I have other buddies who, like, they work outside all day, and they're like, man, when I Sabbath, I actually just want to watch, like, a long movie with my family and, like, enjoy, like, a good meal. And it's not that I don't like those things either, but I think knowing what your bent is or what actually is restorative for you is really, really helpful. Another thing that I've come to believe in my bones is what you cannot rest from, you are a slave to. So whatever that is, that might be work, that might be Instagram, that might even look really good on the outside. Whatever you cannot rest from owns you. Whatever you say to yourself, like, but I could never rest from that. Now I know somebody's thinking like, well, what I can't rest from right now are my toddlers. So like that's probably that's a caveat maybe that it requires extra expiration. I just think it's so interesting to me that like alcoholics get treatment, but workaholics get applause. You know, like we know that this side that's a problem, but on this side that's what gets you advancements. Praise, that's what gets you praise, accolades, up and to the right. And I think the idea of rest is one of the most countercultural things you can do. And the beauty of Sabbath is you intentionally do nothing, and the God of the universe still loves you. Mm-hmm. You did nothing to earn it or deserve it. And I think that actually ties back to this mental health discussion pretty wonderfully, because for a lot of us, what is beneath the veneer of a mental health struggle is the belief that we're not good enough, that we're not truly loved unless we're accomplishing or up and to the right or crushing it here or there. We talked about this on Tuesday too. Jesus said, come to me all who are weary and burdened. Like that's what he expects us to come to him like that sometimes, feeling ragged and at our end. I think the story of Genesis is a beautiful one, that Adam and Eve's first full day is not a day of work and accomplishment, it's a day of rest. And that even we talk about this even as a church culture, we work from rest, not rest from work. There's a long period of my life where I was like burning the candle at both ends for 6 days, collapsing for one, and then rinse and repeat, man. And I was like, I'm keeping a Sabbath. And people who were closest to me were like, I think you're missing the point, actually, about what restorative rest is. But I was still a slave to it. Like I was still controlled by certain things and still am sometimes, to be honest. But I think it's just so critical. It shows up so frequently in the pages of Scripture, and it's the thing that I think we most easily dismiss.
To be just vulnerable. I'm with you. Like this is the hardest thing for me to do. For those that are familiar with the Enneagram, I am a 3, being 4, and so I'm very much high, accomplished, work. Even the funny thing is, even in my rest, I feel like I need to be accomplishing something.
Totally.
Like if I'm gonna, even if it looks like, hey, I'm not gonna do anything today, I still need to do something while I'm not doing anything.
Yes.
It's like this weird dynamic.
Dude,
that
I totally get it.
You just have to. And so for me, it's been so difficult, but I know when you got on board here at the Bridge and you started leaning into those conversations, it was so eye-opening for myself. Just this fact that, man, I'm enslaved to this thing.
Sure.
Like I'm getting home and I want to work more.
Yeah, right.
Before I go to bed, like that's the thing I'm thinking about as I lay on my pillow.
Right.
Like that's not good. Right. That's not always okay. And I get it. There's going to be moments where it's like, hey, you're going to have a desire and there's going to be a passion that's just going to be burning inside of you.
Totally.
And, from God, that it's going to be so good for your soul and energizing and motivational.
Yes.
Like I get that.
Yes.
But I get that for maybe a season. But long term, you're just going to burn yourself out.
Yep. And
like you just mentioned, you're going to kind of burn at both ends. So what's one thing like personally you've done? I know for me, me too, I'm always on a computer. I'm always, creating something or editing,
Yep.
whatever that looks like, or putting together sermons, stuff like that. So yes, I actually enjoy, now that I got a lawnmower at my house, I enjoy doing yard work.
Right.
I dreaded it growing up. My dad would come after me if the lines weren't straight in the yard.
Right.
So it's like, I love doing stuff like that. Anything with my hands. I love getting to go play basketball, and stuff like that is just so refreshing and feels like so much rest in a different way. What is it for you that kind of helped you make that shift in your own personal life?
Man, that's a great question. Some of it's micro, some of it's macro.
Yeah.
Like, I made a commitment to my boys that every day when I get home, my phone is off until they go to sleep.
Wow.
It's not that impressive. It's only like an hour and a half.
Okay.
But
it's like 5 hours.
No. They go to bed at 7:30, whatever. But that's been a rhythm, a very small micro expression of like, hey, I want to be as present with you as I can right now. And I know that if my phone's even on, I wish I had better willpower than this. But if it's even on, if they look away for half a second, I'm like, okay, time to scroll. I just turn it off. Like, I know it's off until they go to sleep, and then I turn it back on. So little rhythms like that have actually paid bigger dividends than some of like the big sweeping. It's like all of our New Year's resolutions where I'm going to work out 17 times a day. And you're like, you're not.
That's too much.
Why don't you commit to working out once a week? Just to start somewhere. But like rhythms like Sabbath, and we've tried to, this might be a weird word to use, but we try to ceremonialize some of it. And like even right now, we've kind of gotten out of that rhythm a little bit. We need to get back into it. But I would like play the sound of a shofar over the speakers. Yeah. My boys like run in a circle, and we like light a candle and we pray a prayer over them. And a lot of what is restorative to me right now is like time with my wife and kids. Yep. And my wife is so much better at this than me.
Yep.
She's so good at like keeping me accountable to like, if I'm like, quick half hour ago, like hammer out some emails. She'll be like, yeah, when they go to sleep, like wait till they're asleep. Like she's so good at holding me to that. And so yes. I get to like see the world through their eyes. If Jesus was serious about kids being closer to the kingdom than most of us, like I want to soak up whatever it is, whatever wonder and awe they're experiencing.
Yep.
Like I watched my boy watch like a line of ants for like a half hour the other day. I never would have noticed this line of ants, but like watching him watch those ants was like worship for me. It was just like, It was like something, I know that sounds cheesy, but like I would have missed all of that if I was just doom scrolling on my phone.
Absolutely.
Like they each all kind of stack on each other. Like how can I be more present to my family? And sometimes it's just like, we're going to watch whatever's on Disney Plus and just be done with it.
Yeah.
But other times it's like, let's go to the parade. Let's go to the children's museum, and like getting out and actually experiencing those things with them right now is just so restorative.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I can't wait for that day.
Yeah. It's killer, man.
Yeah. Well, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, out of your week.
Dude, my pleasure, man.
Jump on the Garden Podcast here. Like I said, we loved having you at the gathering.
Thanks, man.
And even getting just a few moments like this to follow up is such a big deal. And so it means a lot. And yeah, we're grateful that you joined us.
Likewise, man. I think you guys are doing a great job. I'm glad you're on the team, bro.
Appreciate you. Love you, man.
Cheers.